They may share the same nickname, but these two programs finish on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to the college football season. BYU and Houston, what do they need to do to essentially switch places next year in the Big 12 Conference? We're delving into that in a Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars. That across from me digitally is Parker Ainsworth from Locked On Cougs, covering the Houston Cougars. We are your respective hosts covering all things BYU and Houston right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day. And more importantly, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original podcast, covering both BYU and Houston. Having a lot of fun doing this on an everyday basis. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get started today with $250 in bonus bets after your first $5 bet hits. It's all courtesy of friends at FanDuel at FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, Parker Ainsworth, the BYU Cougars finished in third place, essentially. They were tied atop the conference, but didn't make the Big 12 title game. The Houston Cougars finished down the standings a bit this year in football. So
that's very kind of you to say.
I don't want to turn Houston Cougars fans off immediately, so I'm gonna be kind on this side of it. Now, we have seen programs like Oklahoma State go from finishing second in the conference to finishing dead last this season. This is a topsy-turvy football league, it looks like. What did the Houston Cougars do in hopes of essentially ascending the ranks, much like BYU and Arizona State did a year ago via the transfer portal so far?
Well, so they open up with a bang in the transfer portal, getting Connor Wegman. Wegman's a Houston native. He spent some time starting at Texas A&M, got injured this year and lost a job while injured at A&M, and entered his name in the portal early in the, he announced he was going to enter the portal early and ultimately declared he's coming to Houston. A lot of inklings and hush-hushness about when it was like, I think he's going to come. I think he's going to, and they ended up showing up. And suddenly you had, I think it was 5 different offensive linemen join the portal, join Houston in the portal. A couple other skill guys come along the way, tight ends and stuff like that. All guys that want to play with an offense that has a guy like Connor Wegman at the forefront of it. Defensively, they've picked up some guys, kind of pulling together like last year. They get some group of 5 guys that kind of step up and make plays that excelled at that group of 5 level. And then some of the biggest things that happened, if I'm being honest with you, Jake, and I'll hear your BYU taking a second, so I want to hear that too, is Houston managed to keep some guys from entering into the portal that I think a lot of people assumed were going to go. Boogie Johnson, a big-time wideout, and frankly, Jeremiah Wilson, a big-time Houston's best corner last year on PFF grades, was in the portal and pulled his name out and to stay at Houston. So I think Houston actually did pretty well, all things considered, in the portal. At one point, they were in the top 5 in the country. They had a really good first week. BYU, a little bit different situation and scenario, obviously. Didn't start hot, I know, because I was paying attention to the rankings early. And then when things slowed down, I kind of stopped paying attention. So catch me up. Where is BYU right now after portal season is kind of come to a close or slowing down anyway?
It is slowing down, but here's the thing. BYU, they kind of, you said they started really slow, whereas Houston seemed to jump into the portal. You mentioned Connor Wegman and some of the guys that they had. Houston had a very quick start in the portal and had a bunch of guys in a very fast manner. Trust me, I had a lot of Cougar fans who were very grumpy, speaking from the BYU perspective of how slow a start they got in the portal, but in the past week and change, it's picked up in a big way. They added an offensive tackle in Andrew Gentry, who figures to start this year for BYU. They also added a couple of defensive linemen, none bigger than Keanu Tanuvasa from Utah, who was a starting D tackle for the Utes. He's coming to BYU and figures to be kind of the heart and soul of BYU.
Yeah, can we pause on that one? Because there's a big story out there in this one that, listen, I haven't dabbled too far in. I don't want to accuse anything. People in Provo have been nothing but nice to me. I got to ask, Jake, what is that story? What's going on there?
He essentially, because he was a guy who had been pretty vocal about guys leaving Utah, and then about a week or two later decided to put his own name in the transfer portal. There's a lot of Utah fans who are saying, hey, money talks, etc. the simple fact of the matter is he apparently decided to consider his options and decided that hitting the portal was his best option. And I can just say this, having talked with people who are far more in the know on his situation, he had a lot of offers. SEC money was coming after him hard because, once again, he is a NFL prototypical defensive tackle. And BYU was able to win out in the end because I think, number one, they had a pretty competitive NIL package. I'm not going to say that they didn't, because money is always a factor when it comes to stuff like this. But the other thing is, this is a guy who's a very devout LDS kid, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he wanted, as he mentioned, BYU TV on their home, on their TV network, that he wanted to be a place where he could be unapologetically himself. That was the terminology he used. So he feels like pro was the best option for him. And I don't think it hurts either that he just recently got engaged to his girlfriend, who if I'm not mistaken, maybe a student at BYU as well. So, there's a few factors in there.
There's a coming home aspect. Like Wegman came to Houston, coming back home. He's coming back to the church, right? There's something there. Like, that's a fair thing, right? That's a fair thing.
It is. And so BYU's had a really good, I guess, finish to how the portal has gone so far here. But I've looked at this from two different dichotomies, and I want to get your thought on this. Whereas BYU finishing 11-2, they have a lot of their weapons coming back. You mentioned the fact that Houston held on to a lot of guys you may have thought would have left. I feel like BYU is one of those programs just simply due to what BYU is all about. They're a church-affiliated school. It means more to a lot of guys in this program than just playing football. There's the church aspect, and there's a lot playing into that. So BYU, I think, holds on to a lot more of its guys when it comes to transfer portal season than maybe a lot of programs out there. Doesn't mean that they didn't lose some guys, because they did. But I look at this more as BYU's kind of been looking in the portal at more of kind of wants, like, we want this, we want that, and they've been able to target specific positions to add because they have a lot of pieces coming back. Whereas, I want your thought on this, Houston seems to be, hey, Willie Fritz needs to turn this roster over, and guys like Connor Wegman, it's more of a needs-based approach to the portal.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret last year the biggest issue for Houston was the offense. You saw up close and personal at the end of the season, right? The defense was very real. The offense left them out there to dry a lot. And so they went over and got a bunch of talent on the offense side of the football. And frankly, it's going to be a lot of competition in the spring. And I think the talk in Houston is, don't be surprised if some guys that lose those competitions in the spring throw their name in the portal in the later window, right? But right now, they're coming to Houston to compete for jobs because a lot of these guys are from the Houston area. Again, they pull an offensive lineman from Oklahoma State that started there in their conference championship. I guess they set semifinal or whatever it was last year in 2023. He's from Houston, right? They do the same thing with a Lubbock kid, a Lubbock, Texas Tech kid coming back to Houston that grew up in Magnolia, a bunch of things like that coming back to Houston, right? And ultimately, I think the deal there is the focus is offense because of how, we'll just say, bad the offense played last year, right? And so they're going to add some offensive linemen and some tight ends and kind of change things up. They got a new offensive coordinator, pulled in Slade Nagel, who was the OC at Tulane with Willie Fritz, dabbled a little bit and seeing if he could get that head coaching job. He did not. He ended up being the tight ends coach and like a quality control, like a couple of different hats at LSU the last year before getting this OC job a year later. And I think, we saw what that Willie Fritz and Slade Nagel offense looked like when they were at Tulane. Obviously, having Tajay Spears helped a lot, right? But that was a pretty potent offense itself. And so I think you're hoping to see some of those things, Connor Wegman at quarterback, a big thing. And then I think the schedule next year is not easy, but it's easier than last year's was. Bluntly, you're not ending the season at Provo. You're ending the season in Orlando, right? Those are just different environments to play in.
You're not gonna freeze in Provo for a second straight year. That's probably a good thing.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Real quick before we move on to basketball, because we want to talk about the big matchup tomorrow down there in Houston. But you mentioned the fact you feel like the schedule is more manageable for Houston. What's your confidence level? Because I'm expecting BYU to be a top 20 at worst preseason team next year. They should be absolutely in the mix for the Big 12 title, just based on how they finished the season and the pieces they have coming back in 2025. Give me a sense of where you expect Houston to be come preseason expectations time with regards to where they could finish next year.
Well, honestly, obviously we haven't seen spring practice like that. I expect them to win all three non-conference games. They play Stephen F. Austin, Rice, and Oregon State. Those are all very gettable games. At Arizona State, depending on what that roster looks like, I guess Sam Levitt looks very good, obviously. But that's a game I think they can take early. They have TCU, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, down the stretch. Again, I said finish the season at Central Florida. Those are all winnable games. I think it's kind of, they went from last year, the ceiling was a bowl season. This year, the floor, it seems like it's going to be a bowl season. And that in itself is a great 180 to have for Fritz in year 2. We've seen crazier things happen in the Big 12. I'm not saying they couldn't go get 10 or, again, we saw what Arizona State just did, very literally, right? But I think that it's really like the expectations kind of flip-flop. We're saying, okay, you start at, we can find at least 6 wins here. It's, can we find 8? Can we find 9, right? Can we work our way up to that and then kind of catapult it forward after that?
All right, so BYU pushing for 10+ in the Big 12 title, whereas you mentioned Houston. If they push for 8 or 9 wins, that'd be a really marvelous turnaround year 2 for Willie Fritz, and I think they'd be very competitive and make for a fun Big 12 race. Because it sure feels like just at the outset right now. I know we're 240 some odd days away from the start of the season, Parker. It feels like the Big 12. It's gearing up to be another interesting 2025 football season already, just because the different changes on all these rosters lend itself to having a lot of cool storylines. But that's a story for another day. All right, so BYU and Houston in basketball. The Cougars, a little bit of an upstart with regards to what Kevin Young has done in his early tenure at BYU, but going up against one of the old sages of the sport in Kelvin Sampson. What is it going to take for BYU to go into Houston and win that game? And could Houston put BYU essentially in their place and kind of remind them who runs this conference? We'll delve into that next right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, of course, the NFL regular season is coming to a quick close here with the playoffs on tap, but it's not too late to get on the regular season action and do it with our friends over at FanDuel, as they are America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers have finished the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's as simple as that. The best part is the FanDuel has so many different ways for you to pick up a W. All of us have different ways we like to do our sports betting, whether you're a guy who likes to go against the spread, money line, you like player props, which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score. There's a myriad of different ways for you to have fun with our friends over at FanDuel, and the best part is you can customize it to what you like. And once again, just visit FanDuel.com to join up today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet hits. Start today once again at FanDuel.com. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Jake Hatch, Parker Ainsworth along for the ride here on this Friday. All right, so Parker, the Houston Cougars ranked 14th in the country, and BYU heads down to the Fertitta Center. Did I pronounce that right? Is it the Fertitta Center or Fertitta?
Fertitta. He's a restaurant mogul and entertainment mogul. He also owns the Rockets for folks that are in NBA basketball. He's Mr. Houston in a lot of ways.
Tillman Fertitta. Okay, there we go. And I knew of his renown because he's involved in everything, it feels like, there in Houston. But this is a big matchup, a big early season matchup here in the Big 12 Conference, because BYU is kind of that plucky upstart program. And I say that in the sense because Kevin Young, BYU finished 5th in the conference last year, lose their head coach, and Parker for about a week there, I was like, oh boy, what's BYU going to do? Well, all they did is go and hire Kevin Young, and he's essentially just had the Midas touch with everything. Landing top-rated recruits like AJ DeBonsa, bringing in Jaeger Demon, who looks like he's a top 5 pick in next year's NBA draft. There's a lot to look forward to with this matchup, but Houston, man, they're a really, really wily veteran squad, and Kelvin Sampson's among the best when it comes to the college basketball coaching ranks. What are the chances that Kelvin Sampson says, hey, Kevin, you may be doing some good things here, but you got a lot to learn when it comes to this matchup with the Cougs versus the Cougs?
Well, let's first start off, I guess, with that Kelvin has expressed that BYU is a very good program. Like, he has said that throughout the week, and he is not taking them lightly by any stretch. You mentioned that he came for the NBA ranks. Kevin Young did. The Suns, the Sixers, and I guess some like smaller level, like G League kind of stuff before that. And his pro resume obviously helped them get Demon and then DeBansa for next year very, very quickly, right? That the deal with basketball is there's 5 guys on the court, so one makes a real big difference. Houston's biggest thing that you mentioned is veteran guys returning. Of their 8-man rotation last year, they returned 7. The one they did not was Big 12 Player of the Year Jamal Shed. So obviously it's a pretty big hole to fill, and they've had trouble with that in a couple of close contests early. But playing at home with veteran leadership, Jawan Roberts, LJ Cryer, it sounds like Emmanuel Sharp's kind of playing through some ankle, lower leg stuff. But honestly, it's a really, really talented roster that won the regular season by 2 games last year in the Big 12. Name the game is defense, so it now make it ugly. BYU, from what I've been watching, Jake, is kind of the opposite of that. That was my episode on Thursday. I was talking about how this is a styles makes fights and styles clash here kind of thing. What have you enjoyed, I'll ask positively, about the first half year of Kevin Young?
Well, the fact that he's been very innovative with his offenses. Now, Jaeger Demon, who he's kind of the freshman sensation, a 6'9" playmaking guard. He's been out for a month until the Arizona State game. He had missed almost an entire month's worth of games, and he looked very much like a guy who needed some time to get back into game shape with that layoff. But the fun part about this is without him, all Kevin Young has done is essentially say, hey, next man up. And they have been very good about retooling the offense on the fly to feature their best player, whoever it might be on the court at the time. We just saw on Tuesday night in a blowout, Tuesday afternoon, I should say, in a blowout of Arizona State, Richie Saunders goes for a career-high 30 points, Parker. And John Rothstein has been very quick to call this guy like the ultimate glue guy. And he said he may be shedding that glue guy moniker because he's become an offensive force for BYU. So that's the thing, is the offense has come a long way, but the defense has made strides as well. They lost at Providence in that Big 12, Big East challenge game. They went to Rhode Island and got blitzed pretty heavily by Providence in that game. And essentially since then, Parker, they've been much better defensively, but I'm telling you, Arizona State and everybody else that they faced in the lead up to this game against Houston, they pale in comparison of what Houston, I think, brings to the table. Because you mentioned the fact they bring 7 of the 8 guys of that rotation come back. They beat BYU in Provo 75-68 last January. So I think this is a BYU squad that the veteran players like Dallin Hall and Richie Saunders remember what happened a year ago in Provo, but they also understand that this is a massive, massive challenge. Because I want your thought on this. It sure feels like Kelvin Sampson is going to have something schemed up to make sure that guys like Jaeger Demon, Richie Saunders, Cannon Catchings, kind of the offensive weapons that BYU has, he's going to make sure that they have every opportunity to get locked up by the Houston Cougars.
Yeah, and I've been trying to take guesses at a dartboard as far as which one it will be that he shuts down, but there'll be one of them he essentially removes from the game. And it's nothing personal against Kevin Young or anyone. His deal is much like Bill Belichick at the NFL level. It's like, I'm going to take what you do best. I'm going to take one of your guys, and I'm going to make you beat me with somebody else, right? And if that's Demon, if that's Catching, I thought Cannon Catching shot the ball pretty well as well. Like, if taking one of those guys away and say, okay, one hand's tied behind your back, now can you do it still? And if the halftime's different, we'll adjust and change how we're doing it then. I don't know which of those 3-headed monster people you're talking about he's going to do it with. The hardest to me is Demon, because as an assist guy, as a creative guy, you can't keep him from passing the ball. I don't know how you do that with him.
And that's a very good point, because if I were trying to scheme up to defend BYU, I would deny Demon every opportunity to facilitate, because as you mentioned, he's become an elite facilitator. His shot is still not quite there. That's kind of the big question mark with him, is his shooting going to come around where he can be that true weapon on the perimeter? But you mentioned the fact that he can facilitate this BYU offense. If I was Kelvin Sampson and the Houston Cougars, I would make every effort to deny him the ball and make sure that he does not facilitate, and essentially tell Richie Saunders, Cannon Catchings, Dallin Hall, any of the other players on the court for BYU, hey, if you guys end up being the weapon, yeah, we'll adjust as necessary, but we are not going to let Demon get us early.
So you mentioned you had a month without him. What did you think of the way offense flow? Because it flows very well with him running the point guard type of role as a forward. What did it look like you watch him every game, in your eye, without him on the floor?
It actually was okay, because here's the thing. Dallin Hall, who's the kind of the off guard, they play off each other, him and Jaeger Demon as the 2 ball handlers in this offense. Dallin Hall missed the early part of the season when Jaeger was really kind of at the peak of his powers early on this season. He had a toe injury that he was rehabbing from, speaking of Hall. And essentially when Jaeger went out, Dallin Hall had just come back, and he essentially stepped into that playmaking role and was quite adept at it. So the nice part is that they found options with both of those guys essentially being able to step in for one another. Now, how can you get both of them together doing what they've been doing at different points this season where they can be that two-headed monster? Because if they can do that, it's going to be very difficult to defend both of them because their ability to facilitate and, more importantly, in the case of Hall, hit big shots and timely shots could be a big key to BYU notching an upset potentially on Saturday.
I want to hear more about potential upsets because they got one guy that's a high energy guy that I really like on the BYU roster. And I think the matchup's going to be fun, but that I feel like sounds like the next time. So let's get there in a second.
Right. That's a nice tease. I like that. All right, we will delve into that next as this Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs crossover rolls on right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Rocket Money. Now it's the new year. Obviously, a lot of us have New Year's resolutions, and a lot of us with those New Year's resolutions want to save more money. Rocket Money can help you find subscriptions you may have forgotten about that you're paying for twice or even 2 or 3 times more than that to help you save money. All of us have those things that we just forgot about because you subscribed once, completely forgot about it. Rocket Money will search those out and help you track them down. The best part, it's like having a personal assistant for your finances. It is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It's a win-win-win all the way around. Brings everything together in one place, whether it's those subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this coming year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved over $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when they use all the premium features in the app. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster, and do it with our friends at Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon to get started. And one more time, just a reminder, check them out today at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Jay Catch here. That is Parker Ainsworth from Locked On Cougs there. All right, Parker. So you said there's an energy guy that you are hoping, I guess, doesn't hurt Houston in this game. You didn't give me a name, so I am very curious which guy you are targeting here.
Well, I'm going to butcher it, which is part of the problem. But I've watched a game and a half as of the recording of this of BYU to get ready to get what I'm going to see happen on Saturday. Kiba Kita looks like a Houston Cougar in every way to me. Energy, long arms, a little undersized technically, but makes up for the high motor. He's a very traditional Houston Cougar center in that way. I liked watching him play. So Arizona State and part of the Ole Miss game thus far. What can you tell me about Kiba Kita? And please tell me he's not going to beat my Houston Cougars on Saturday. Don't tell me that part.
So it's Kiba Kita.
Oh, so I was wrong. Perfect. Gotcha.
But you were close. Here's the thing: you're not the only one that will guess it that way. He is a guy that BYU's been very aware of for years because he played his high school ball in Mount Pleasant, Utah, at a private school called Wasatch Academy. They play in the EYBL. They play in these elite private school leagues across the country. And he was a guy that BYU had targeted about coming to BYU. He ultimately went to Utah for a couple of years. But when Kevin Young hired Chris Burgess to join his staff from Utah, well, Kiba Kita was very quick to jump into the portal and follow Chris Burgess south to Provo. And yes, he is, I think Houston fans, they will get a look at him and say, yeah, this guy would fit totally with what Houston likes to do with their big man. Because you mentioned he's 6'8". He's built like a Greek god. He's chiseled out of
jacked. Dude, he's jacked.
Yeah. And he's got the athleticism to match that physicality. So he fits the bill of what you want. Yes, you'd like to have him be 4 inches taller and be a true 7-footer. Everybody would. But
right.
What he lacks in overall height, he makes up for in spades with his athleticism. The biggest thing for him right now, Parker, is his offensive inability to really stretch the floor. He is a true rim-rolling big man. So that's the thing about this is guys like Jaeger Demon, Dallin Hall, they'll have him come on ball screens, and if they can find him going to the rim, they'll lob it into him and let him do his thing. But he's not necessarily the biggest back-to-the-basket guy, nor is he a guy who can step out and hit a 15, 18, 20-foot jump shot. There are other big men, though. Fousseyni Traore, similar, undersized big man. He is more of that traditional back to the basket when you need a bucket, toss it in there, let him go to work. And I think Houston fans saw him last year. Foose played against Houston in that game, if I recall correctly. So they've got 2 different big men that BYU can throw at Houston. The biggest thing is beyond those 2, there's not a lot of depth. So foul trouble will absolutely be a critical thing in this game.
Well, and I don't mean to rain on your parade or spoil your turkey. I don't know which metaphor I'm going to go with there, but Jawan Roberts being a focal point of the offense was kind of a thing that Houston fell on last year. They hadn't really fallen to that this year. And then Oklahoma State, he turned around and got 20 points. And frankly, I argue they should have given the ball more. 20 points on 13 shots.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
And he's the power forward. And so I don't know who covers him as a power forward. He's a very traditional, like 1990s, 2000s power forward. He's only 6'8", 6'9", right, himself. But I guess the Keita thing to me was he's the high rebound guy, and he's not like a guy like he's built like a Greek guy, like you said, but he's not a 7-footer that's a high rebound guy. He's high motor high rebound guy. So you mentioned low post depth. Do they ever go? I mean, with all these shooters and Demon running point, do they ever go? They just spread it out and have no big men on the floor. I mean, they got the height to do it at other positions, I would imagine.
They tried that at multiple points earlier this season. Mihailo Boskovic, he is another addition that's new to the roster this year. He's a former EuroLeague youth star. They brought him in with the whole thought that he could be kind of that 5-out big man for them because he's legitimately 6'11", Parker, 6'10", 6'11". But the problem is he's kind of found himself as the odd man out in this rotation. It was too big of a rotation. They were playing 10, 11 guys, and Kevin Young has made it a point. He said, I've got to cut this down. And this past game, we didn't see Mihailo go into that game. So it feels like BYU is essentially going to go with a 4-out, 1-in. Just that's kind of I think, their identity this season. I think ideally in future iterations of this BYU basketball program, they will be able to play 5-out. And maybe at some point they find that option during this Big 12 season. But in this game, Parker, it doesn't feel like they'll be able to play that 5-out alignment because it would be something they would love to do to spread Houston out a little bit to open up that lane. But I just don't see the ready-made option to allow them to truly play that style.
I'm never going to force them from Provo to gamble, but I will ask you a question here because on KenPom, they got Houston favored by 11 points. Mm-hmm. I would say as a home team, that's not actually that crazy a spread given the discrepancy in ratings and standings and things like that. I think that's fairly respectful of BYU, I guess I should say. And so what are you anticipating, predicting? What do you think of the 11-point KenPom analytical spread? And I imagine you think it's going to be closer than that at least, right?
Well, I would hope so. Here's the deal. Ken Pomeroy actually lives here in Utah. I've gotten to know him fairly well over the years, and I trust his ratings more than anybody else's out there. And that may be just personal bias because I know the guy and I like him a lot. I think 11 points is valid in this instance, Parker, because BYU, with the fact that they've had guys like Richie Saunders and Jaeger Demon miss time in the past month or so, they really haven't been able to really narrow in on what their set rotation is going to be. And the other thing is that rotation, it's been streaky with regards to its outside shooting. So with that combination of factors where the rotation may not be fully what they want it to be, because if this game were played maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now, I think you'd have a better idea of what the rotation was going to be and a better idea of what the overall shooting prowess of the squad was. But right now, with those question marks lingering over this team, I think 11 points is a valid number. But if BYU's shooting does show up on the road there in the Fertitta Center, BYU could make that a 4 or 5 point game easily, but I've got questions if they can find enough consistency in the outside shooting game to keep them in this one.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I worry about if this turns into a shootout. Again, on my Thursday episode, I talk about styles and fight and so on. Houston's offense is still missing that Jamal Shed guy from a year ago that just says, hey, I put everyone in the backpack and we're going forward with this kind of thing, right? They're kind of figuring out who that is. They've had moments where it's a different guy, but it hadn't been one guy for 40 minutes at any point this year. And I mean, Jamal Shed literally would play 40 minutes a game last year. And so if this gets into a thing where BYU's hot and it is high scoring, I worry about, can Houston keep up? Houston's defense is going to make it be somebody we haven't talked about yet that gets hot, right? That's part of the deal. It's going to be someone down the bench. I'm going to pull up a random name here. I don't know. Let me pull up the roster down the depth chart. It's going to be Boskovic. I don't. Sure, it'll be.
He's been out of the rotation, but there's no reason he couldn't do it because he has shown an ability to shoot from the outside and be that kind of that true stretch big man. So there is a chance that one of those guys, Dallin Hall, hasn't really gone off for a big game that I really consider to be a big game for him this year. That would be a big opportunity for him to do that. He was the guy last year when BYU went into Lawrence, Kansas and beat the Jayhawks. It was Dallin Hall's show down the stretch. He hit a big shot over Hunter Dickinson that it'll be played on BYU highlight reels for years to come because it was just right in your face, bullseye. And I was like, wow, okay, that kid's got some stones. So they need somebody to step up. And you mentioned the fact that Houston needs a Jamal Shed type player. BYU needs that same thing. It's kind of been by committee for BYU on that front with regards to who takes the scoring load on a given night. But in a game like this, when you're a decided underdog going to get against a team like Houston, you need like a Richie Saunders 30-point performance from Tuesday. If he could translate over to another 20-25 performance down there in Houston, that would go a long way to helping BYU hopefully pull off an upset.
I think it's going to be a fun game and a good game, and Big 12 basketball is a big thing to me. I really love Big 12 basketball because the games are just physical and they're fun and they're close and competitive. We got to agree on one thing, though, before we get out of here.
Okay.
Y'all got them once. We got them twice. You mentioned you did it last year. Can we just all beat Kansas? Can we just all beat Kansas?
I'm totally okay with that. They're coming to Provo for the first time in quite some time later this season. And, yeah, I would love nothing more than to make the Jayhawks be even more upset than they were last year when BYU beat them on their home court.
Yeah, me too. We should all do that. All of us.
Make the Jayhawks unhappy. And I'm sure that Derek Johnson from Locked On Jayhawks is going to be very angry at both of us for saying that, but that's okay. Well, Parker, thanks so much for doing this. It's always good to catch up with our fellow hosts across the network. If BYU fans, that Thursday episode you talked about contrast and styles, if they want more on BYU and Houston to lead up to this game, where can they find your work?
Well, I apologize. I found I mispronounced like 3 names on it so far. But you can find me at Painsworth512 on all your social media handles and stuff like that. And then Locked On Cougs, much like Locked On Cougars, is everywhere you get your podcast. I think it's up on YouTube and all the audios. There was some people talking about audio issues, but I think mine have been out there on the audio side of things this week. So we're good there.
All right. Well, and if Houston fans, you want more of my thoughts on BYU, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube, as Parker mentioned. But if you want my thoughts on all things sports, you can check out our show feeds, Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or you can check me out on X/Twitter at Jacob C. Hatch. Well, Parker, I'm sad this is the only matchup between these two this year. I was hoping we were getting the double dip with Houston, but hopefully maybe we see you guys in March or something like that. All right.
Yeah, that's a Big 12 tourney time at least, right? It'll be fun. That'll be fun.
It would be a lot of fun. Well, thanks again for doing this, my man. And I'll be sure both of us will have postcast editions, I'm sure, shortly after this game goes final tomorrow afternoon. We'll have a full reaction come up in the weeks ahead. But Parker, thanks as always, my man. Hope all is well with you, and a happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to go Cougs. We can all say that part, right? Go Cougs. We all say that.
Go Cougs. Yeah, we all say that. Come on, we all say that. All right. Well, thanks again for making Locked On Cougs and Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougs and Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And more importantly, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougs and the Locked On Cougars podcast.